Let's talk Tony DeAngelo, a very controversial figure who's reemerged in the news. For those who don't know, Tony DeAngelo, a one-time NHL regular, had this season been playing in the KHL for St. Petersburg. However, earlier this week, it was announced that the player and the team mutually agreed to terminate DeAngelo's contract and he would be returning to North America. I gotta admit, I was surprised by this. I don't follow the KHL fully, but last time I checked, DeAngelo was actually the league's leading scorer, as a defenseman no less. So what's the deal? Well, officially, DeAngelo and St. Petersburg cited family reasons for his departure, but there's a lot of speculation. For one, Tony DeAngelo's point production has fallen off, and in the KHL, there are extremely high expectations for import players. He hadn't scored a point in 4 straight games, and it's possible that could be tied to his departure, though I won't pretend to know. However, with Tony DeAngelo, there's also a history. DeAngelo early in his career was seen as a very talented and promising NHL prospect. The Rangers in 2020 signed him for a 2-year deal worth nearly $10 million, but things pretty quickly fell apart. He had disciplinary issues both on and off the ice, culminating in a fight with the Rangers backup at the time, Alexander Georgiev, after a loss to Pittsburgh. Things were so bad that the Rangers actually bought the player out, which for a developing defenseman of his caliber, pretty shocking. I mean, he was coming off a year where he had 53 points in 68 games. Anyway, after being bought out by the Rangers, DeAngelo signed a prove-it contract with Carolina. He did prove it and went on to sign another 2-year, $10 million contract, this time with Philadelphia. However, at the end of his first season, once again, Tony DeAngelo was bought out, and the statement the Flyers released was actually somewhat shocking. For one, they highlighted that this was the player's second buyout, and they also stated that they had trouble keeping the pucks out of the net when he was on the ice, which you don't usually see teams throwing shade at specific players, especially when they've been bought out. DeAngelo has always been an offensive first defenseman, so I'd be surprised if Philly really was that shocked by his lack of defense. And pretty much everyone knew that this was really a way to move the player to Carolina without having to retain contract, just because of the buyout rules end up being cheaper. Either way, at the time, DeAngelo was the only player to have been bought out twice, and he was also developing a reputation, at least among fans, of course. We're not in the locker room for being a bit of an issue personality-wise. Before being dropped by the Flyers, DeAngelo was scratched for the last 5 games of the season, and it was pretty clear that there was personality conflict between him and Tortorella. And I just want to emphasize, the Flyers moved on from a guy who not only had 42 points in 70 games, but who they also traded assets to secure the rights to sign. I mean, sunk cost fallacy, whatever, but it is worth mentioning. Anyway, he subsequently re-signed with Carolina, but his offensive production started to drop off. His defensive issues continued. He was getting limited time on ice. He pretty much disappeared during the playoffs. I actually noticed that as well. When the Rangers played Carolina in 21-22, he was just a major defensive liability, but he was a free agent after the season and went to sign in St. Petersburg, leading us to where we are today. So what's really going on? For one, Tony very well could have family issues, and of course, if that's the case, all the better to him and his family. You know, I wasn't as engaged in Rangers fandom, which some of you may find hard to believe, when the whole Tony DeAngelo thing was going on. I don't really hold any animosity towards him. So if it was family reasons, hopefully everything's okay. But it could also be game, as we mentioned earlier, or the fact that Tony DeAngelo seems to present difficulties for the locker room. I mean, that's putting it simply, but it's also honest. Hockey News Hub, admittedly an account I'm not super familiar with, posted a report stating that there were issues between him and the team. But I can't verify that in any way. It's just, I've seen a lot of discussion going around, so I wanted to address it. From the interviews I've seen from NHL players who've played in the KHL, it can be pretty high stress, not just because of the culture shock and the sort of intense nature of playing in Russia, but also because salary is often tied to performance bonuses and there's so much pressure for import players to perform. St. Petersburg as a team also seems to be a bit of a mess right now. But anyway, I'm not a KHL expert. I won't pretend to know what's going on there, but I do want to address one comment which was also blowing up on Twitter today. It was from Jordan Smoltz, former pro hockey player, who said Tony DeAngelo deserves a sniff back in the National League. Guy went over to Continental, lit it up. Former teammates I've spoken with love him. Just because the woke media has painted him out to be a bad guy over his political views doesn't mean he's a bad egg. Plus, he's a smart enough fellow to realize this is the final straw, if that's what you want to call it. He can play. Straight up facilitator. Toronto, Tampa, Detroit, Edmonton, he would be cheap. And potentially, I can see maybe someone taking a risk on DeAngelo at least as a 6th or 7th defenseman, perhaps a power play specialist. Who knows? He'd definitely be league minimum. He'd be looking to prove himself, as was the case with his first stint with Carolina. But saying that DeAngelo has been ostracized by the woke media because he's a right winger is just absolutely insane. A lot of people in the NHL are right wingers. How many people retweeted things after the assassination attempt? Like, who cares? These are rich people. They pay a lot of taxes. They're in sports. Lots of them probably lean right wing. It doesn't matter. I mean, listen to an episode of Spit and Chicklets when Wit starts talking about politics. Let's be serious here. Tony's a bit more brazen, for sure. I remember in his Rangers days, he wanted to start a politics podcast. But this is the NHL. Even if conservatism was some rare thing rather than the, current leading political movement in the United States, teams have looked past so much when it comes to keeping players, coaches, whoever, if they're skilled enough. So those are my thoughts generally on the situation. Again, I don't know what Tony DeAngelo is like in the locker room, but these are the objective facts and some of the story of his career so far. Let me know what you guys think on all this and more down below. If you enjoyed today's video, please drop a like, and if you want more content, there's a new basketball, football, and hockey video on screen right now. I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.